Welcome, everybody. Insights with Bob and Mike. I'm Bob Wright. 206-619-3274, 206-619-3274.
And I am Mike Walsh, 310-383-1570 is where you can reach me. That's 310-383-1570. Multifamily specialist with the Foundation Group. We're on hand 24/7 to meet your commercial real estate needs.
This week, we're going to try and answer some of your questions about the complexities of the market.
Yeah, it's a weird time, a real confusing market. We've almost had this perfect storm of problems, whether it's been COVID-19, the local political climate, and civil unrest, tenants not able to pay their rent, not to mention many people would suggest we were due for a market correction anyway.
So what we did, we had a conversation with 4 property management companies, 1 large firm, 1 medium-sized company, and 2 smaller boutique-type firms, Serco, Redside, the Foundation Group, and Pilot. And hopefully this will give you a picture. All 4 of them together give a similar picture, but at the same time, each brings a different perspective. Listen to all 4 if you can, because all of it combined gives a strong and a clear picture of what's going on in the Seattle rental market. We'll begin with Serco. Serco handles both multifamily and office. Their multifamily arm, as I said, manages about 12,000 units. We sat down with CEO Rob Kellum, and these are your questions, the questions you, our clients, are asking us. Wow, this COVID thing has really turned us upside down. Tell me, how has it impacted your business? Vacancy rates, what's the impact on vacancy rates?
Well, I mean, surprisingly, it really hasn't impacted us up until maybe the last couple of months. And more specifically, it's really only impacted us in city. And our occupancy rates at, because we're anywhere from Lacey up to as far as Bellingham area. And our occupancy rates have held very well. In city, it's not even so much COVID, but it's all the turmoil going on down there that we really feel deterred people from moving downtown. And when they get the green light to work from home, there's no reason to move downtown close to their old offices in Amazon, Microsoft, Expedia, or wherever. So we're that area. We have buildings in Capitol Hill, downtown, Queen Anne, but mostly Capitol Hill is the worst. It's suffered the most. I know we're running in the low 90s, 92, 93% occupancy right now. We know some of our neighbors down there are running 20% vacancy rates. And we've just seen the demand for that market and those units just drop off dramatically.
Back to rental rates, collections. What about collections? What about not talking about occupancy, but what percentage of tenants in place are paying their rent?
Well, again, we did very well up until starting maybe in August, but through July, I'd say that our collections were still 94, 95% overall across the board. And our higher end buildings, call it our A buildings, we've had very little difficulty. It's just been one-off here or there that we've had collection issues or delinquency issues. But then out at some of the suburbs and some of the, call it the B minus buildings, we've had, and it's just clear to us that those are buildings that are occupied more by service workers and call maybe blue collar type workers who've had layoffs, and so those buildings have had higher delinquencies. Then in August they crept up a little more, and then but people were being sustained by the additional federal unemployment money. And, but since that's ended, we've seen a small spike in delinquencies as well. And I think right now across the board, we're more like in the 89, 90% collections, but so a 10% delinquency, call it.
What concerns me is that people have their rainy day fund set aside, and that's going to run out pretty soon.
Yeah, we're concerned with all of that, believe me. And there's been a small minority of residents who have just been holdouts and have just decided since even back as far as March or April that they weren't going to pay their rent, even though we know that many of those people were still employed or working and had income. So, I mean, last thing that we want to do is evict people. I mean, the last thing it is the last resort. I mean, not only having people out in the street, but it's a huge hassle and very expensive to evict people. So we'd much rather work with people, even at the smallest payment agreement amounts. And I mean, we've got people that are paying an extra $100, $300 a month kind of thing to try to keep up on some of the back rent, and as well as they've gone back to work and they're paying their current rent, and let's say they might have 2 or 3 months of back rent owed because they honestly couldn't pay it. Well, we would never try to evict those people. We will work with those people all day long. But it's we do have people who are just, they won't talk to us, they ignore us. They made a blatant demonstration that they weren't going to pay their rent.
But there are not many of those.
We've had there's not. It's a small percentage, but believe me, we've had a number of people show up with brand new cars in the parking lot, and brand new, several people, brand new furniture, entire apartment full of new furniture, but they can't pay their rent. So there's some people taking advantage of it. It is fortunately a very small percentage, but it does happen.
And this gets to a bunch of Michael's questions, and I've been monopolizing the conversation. Michael wanted to talk about the political environment.
Well, I got to touch on some of you actually answered a few of the questions that I had, but specifically on the people, because we're hearing similar stories where tenants are just, there's no communication between the management team and the tenant, or people are voluntarily willing to withhold rent. But is there any kind of geographic is it Capitol Hill or Seattle? Because during the Chop Zone deal, you saw these signs across Broadway and various other places that were sort of encouraging people not to do that. So is that type of behavior for tenants more centered in the core area, or is this sort of a universal theme?
No, it is spotty across our whole portfolio. And, I'm thinking like we have a building that's 2 blocks off the Chop Zone. It's a newer 4 or 5 year old building, mid-rise 8-story building that, we had one serious collection issue and we've got them to move out. We have one other person who was worked in restaurants, and so he's back to work now, and so he's playing catch up and he's trying. But other than that, we've collected from everybody right on time. Again, the bigger issue for us for watching is our rent demand and our rental market down in those areas, or especially Capitol Hill, have deteriorated to almost zero demand. It's just shocking how little response our ads are bringing when we had great response or great demand, before the first quarter or first through the spring of this year. And we see it as a combination of people being allowed to work from home. I mean, we had back in starting July, and I think a few in August. Some of our buildings like that had new prospects, renters committed to move in, and so like they were going to plan to move in 1st of August or 1st of September, and then they call us back and say, "Hey, our company told us they're not moving us. We don't need to move." These are people coming from New York, Boston, Chicago, and they're companies told them that they'll just have them stay put. They're not going to pay to move them. So that, along with, people can go out if they can work from home and they don't need to commute into downtown Seattle. They can go out to many of the suburbs and get a much more apartment for less money, and that's what people are doing. And there's no reason. And the other factor, frankly, is all the chaos down there. It scares people, and they ask about it when they call. And we've had to double our efforts as far as our customer service, call it, and our assurances to our residents down in those areas that, hey, we're doing all we can to, protect them, protect our building. That, for instance, that one building example, our poor maintenance guy, for that period of when the CHOP was so active, he spent every day just cleaning graffiti off all the lower retail windows. We had our dumpsters about several times that have been pushed out in the middle of the streets and lit on fire. So it's, those are the type of things that people, if they're going to pay that kind of money to live in a nice apartment, they don't want to come home to this stuff. They don't want to worry about, how I'm going to drive through the streets to get into my building, or that I can't walk out and feel comfortable and safe walking out on the sidewalks when there's dumpster fires below my window. So it's certainly calmed down since all that, the height of all that, but people are still, wary of that.
What about rental rates? Have the rental rates gone down at all?
Well, again, I keep focusing back on Capitol Hill, but that's where it's most impacted our rents. We just went across the board, and just in the last week to 2 weeks, we dropped a bunch of rental rates, and that's just because the whole market has dropped. We're seeing rates for like studio and one-bedroom apartments that we haven't seen for 4 to 5 years ago. We're back down to those rates again. Of course, our expenses certainly haven't dropped.
So percentage-wise, what would you, just roughly?
I'd say so. Apartments that used to go from $1,800 to $2,000 a month, we've dropped some of those down to like $1,495 up to $1,700.
Mm-hmm.
So it's easily $200 to $300 on a apartment that size. So
is that just in Seattle? How about in the outlying areas?
No, in the outlying areas, no. Our rents have held. Our rent increases have been, I would say, more limited in the last couple of months, especially. But our rents really have held. Like when you go out to Bellevue, Redmond, Kirkland, Renton, Tukwila, all those areas we've held our rents and made. Maybe there was a planned rent increase on a turnover of maybe $50 a month. So now that same turnover now is at $25 a month. But there was even some rent increases.
Back to the core area. What about Queen Anne as compared to Capitol Hill? The Queen Anne area doesn't seem to be as impacted by the demonstrators. Are those rates different?
Yeah, they have not been affected. We've got we just have a couple of buildings in Queen Anne right now, but those are steady, good occupancy, solid, and no rent decreases.
This may be a myth. I don't know. Maybe I shouldn't go there, but I kept hearing from it's somebody told somebody that during the CHOP zone occupation, some of these protesters were gaining access to buildings, walking the halls, harassing the tenants. Did that actually happen?
I don't remember hearing stories in our buildings. again, focusing on Capitol Hill, our buildings there over the years, it's grown. The homeless population or the homeless issues have grown. That's been our biggest problem.
Mm-hmm.
I mean, it's a constant fight to keep homeless people from sneaking into our buildings, breaking into our buildings, and camping in, hallways, stairwells, storage rooms. So we've had to hire a lot of extra security, and so again, we're protecting the safety and the rights of our residents who pay good money to be there, but that's been more of a constant issue, and which is ongoing, and that's separate from the protest in the chop zone.
Here I am monopolizing the conversation again. Michael, I'm sure, has some more questions.
Well, I was curious if on the single family market right now is relatively strong comparatively, and every once in a while you talk to a tenant upon a move out, and the reason is nothing more than they're moving on to another step in their life and taking the leap to buy a home. Has that played into to your guys' buildings or with your guys' tenants at all at this point in time, or are these primarily economic and COVID related decisions to move out?
We've had an upsurge definitely of people buying homes as the reason they give us for relocating and moving out of our buildings. Definitely, I would say that number has really, our average numbers there have doubled from what, and often just looking at the reports in the last, you see really in the last couple of months, that has, we'll have as many as I would say 40-50% of the move outs are buying homes or condominiums. So it's, and that's in our sort of, maybe I'll call our upper economic level buildings, the B and A and B buildings, and in more in city, Bellevue, Seattle properties. That's been more the case.
And it hasn't been, at least in areas like Queen Anne or Redmond or Bellevue, it hasn't been difficult to replace those tenants with equally. People with just as much means to pay the rate prior. If say 2 out of 10 of the move outs have to do with the fact that they're buying homes, are you able to replace those people at equal rates pretty easily at this point?
Still for the most part, yes.
That's good to hear. Thank you very much for giving us your time. That was Rob Kellum, CEO of Serco Property Management. Next, we talked with Craig Swanson of Redside Partners Property Management. Redside manages around 2,600 units, primarily residential and some commercial in the Seattle core.
But let's talk about the buildings you manage. I mean, your business activity can't scale down because you've still got the same buildings to manage. You've still got the same issues to deal with. How has it impacted vacancy rates and rental rates?
Well, I guess as I got started in saying, initially it was not a lot of people moving in April and May because they really couldn't. Everybody was hunkered down. And then, June, people started moving some more. And it still seemed to be going okay. I think, it's hard to understand what event has had the most impact on us. Obviously, COVID has been the underlining denominator of this throughout the last 6 months. And with that comes higher unemployment. Service sector obviously getting hit the hardest, but then there's the civil unrest and so on and so forth. And so I would say throughout the course of the summer, we were doing okay up until about August 1st. And that's when I would say it certainly seemed like things started to taper off, both on the velocity of prospective tenants coming into the pipeline and the amount of the rents. And over the last 45 days or so, It's felt more like October and November rather than August and September. Point being that rents are down, and I don't have a. It depends on the building and what somebody defines as quote unquote market. But rents are down, I don't know, 10%, 15%, 20%. All those are possibilities. And there's some variation on areas of town. West Seattle has had a tough go of it, obviously with the West Seattle Bridge. That being said, we're doing okay over there. Capitol Hill has had a tough go of it, somewhat self-inflicted with the chop, and the enabling it to linger on. And other parts of the city are certainly hurting, but those are two areas in particular that seem to have been hit the hardest. In the city, we don't manage a bunch of stuff in suburban areas, and from what I understand, that product is doing a little bit better. But in the city, those two areas are the most challenged.
Comparing Queen Anne and Capitol Hill has had the most impact from the civil unrest. Is the vacancy rate and the rental rate different on Capitol Hill and Queen Anne? Are we doing better on Queen Anne?
I don't have those numbers in front of me, but I would say by and large, or generally speaking, yes, Queen Anne's doing slightly. I mean, it's not a factor of 2 or 3. It's maybe a factor of 10%, maybe better on Queen Anne or Ballard than it feels like on Capitol Hill or West Seattle. And I'm hopeful that Capitol Hill will rebound, but it's been a tough go over here.
Sure. Michael, you got some questions too.
How much communication have you had with your tenants as far as motivating factors for moving out? Certainly you touched on, and we've heard that what's going on, or what was going on Capitol Hill has forced a few people out, and certainly COVID has made it more reasonable for people to move out of the city and maybe work remotely from an outlying area and get a little more bang for your buck. But do you have a general sense of what the tenants are thinking, and is there any truth to this movement of people actively holding out on rents just because they can at this point?
I'll answer your last question first. Delinquency. It's been pretty consistent, although it's growing in size. That 3 to 4% of our tenants are delinquent at the end of the month. We're trying to catch up all month long, and we monitor that weekly. And typically, we make 30% improvements each week with the delinquency, certainly by number of units. And so by the end of the month, I'd say we've collected 96%, 97%, and that is slipping over time. That number's slipping down. But we're also seeing that while the number of delinquent units is staying relatively constant, the number of delinquent dollars is going up. And what we're seeing is there's more than a handful, but not a bucket full, of people who are continuing to rack up delinquent amounts. And we're doing everything we can to work with them. And in case we've been led to believe, we haven't had any success with this yet. We haven't brought it in front of a judge yet. But we've been led to believe that if they are non-communicative with us, then we do have the right, or if they provide a payment plan and fail on that payment plan, then we have the right to proceed with evictions. And it's always a little bit challenging to walk the line of being compassionate, because some of these people have good reasons, and the economic line of saying, hey, you owe us this money. But at the end of the day, the money is owed, and we would prefer to have them get out of the apartment and develop a very modest payment plan rather than to rack up some $10,000 debt or more that they're never going to have a chance of paying back. So that's a way that we're working on that. I think we're doing okay there. It's certainly a challenge, and we certainly have more delinquent dollars than we did a year ago.
But you're saying,
go ahead.
You're saying that 96% of the people in place, I'm not talking about vacancy or occupancy,
Yeah,
I'm talking
yeah.
about the people in place are paying their rent, and that's beginning to slip. Is it going down to what, 90%, or do you have a feel
No,
for
I
that?
think it was 97. I'm going to say it was 97.5%. Maybe were paying their rent, and then 97%, and then 96.5%, and 96%, 95%. That's by the end of the month. We started in April. 97.5% of the people would pay, and now we're closer to 95% of the people are not delinquent. And I don't have the numbers as to what that what those amounts are. There are a lot of people who have less than $500 delinquent, but there's a handful of people who are just simply aren't paying, and those are the most challenging.
I'd like to get back to rents, and this is a really hard question to answer. And maybe since Mike and Patty have retired, this information just isn't available. Rents on Capitol Hill, let's say, have they gone down, and by how much? Just with your buildings.
I don't have that number at hand, and it's such a fluid number. 100% they have gone down. We are very anxious to get tenants into our space. I have a building at 14th and Pine that we've had for 20 years, and we've never had an issue getting it leased. Never. Now, and then we're talking 25, 26 units. Now, we have 3 or 4 vacancies in there, and maybe a couple of inquiries a week, and those are at rents that are probably 15%, maybe now 20% off what they were 9 months ago.
What about Queen Anne?
Similar situation, but not as bad, and then maybe it's not 15 to 20, but maybe it's 10 to 15% down.
West Seattle.
I'd say West Seattle feels more like Capitol Hill right now, in that they're it's probably 15 to 20%, and that. The challenge here, Bob, as I rattle off all these numbers, and these are a little bit from the hip, is how much of it is economic, how much of it is in that I would throw COVID into that, and the West Seattle Bridge of it, and how much of it is the time of the year. But it doesn't feel like there's the same velocity of tenants coming through the prospect pipeline that there were last, September 19th, 2019.
Have some of the companies that have, you saw the, was it Facebook that bought the REI building in Bellevue, and certainly some of the jobs out of Seattle have moved to the east side. Has that, have you seen any direct impact on, maybe not the people that are currently in the buildings, but are there less demands from people that are calling from Boston or New York or Chicago or Denver that are coming into town, that might have otherwise been a prime candidate for a building on Capitol Hill or Queen Anne, but because of the shift in employment are looking at something on the east side?
No, I don't have a direct answer to that. What I have found interesting in talking to some folks, one person who was leasing up a brand new Class A office building or Class A building here on Capitol Hill, is those folks calling from Boston or Chicago or Dallas or wherever and moving to Seattle realize that a building's on Capitol Hill, and that's where they just saw all this news about SHOP. They think that Capitol Hill is not a safe place, so they are not seeking out Capitol Hill. The people that are moving to Capitol Hill as a group, this is very generally speaking, are people who are from here who know that it's, what happened here as far as the violence is concerned is, historically speaking, an anomaly. Mm-hmm. And so it is a safe place.
Yeah,
but for those people looking from outside town, they don't think Capitol Hill is nearly as appealing as it was 6 months ago. And I guess I would throw out too. And I was watching another Zoom call earlier today, and I think the gentleman there from Goodman Real Estate made a great point that I think is important for all of your listeners, or all the folks out there to think about. Is so many of us in our fragmented world of real estate have not paid attention to politics, and politics are rubbing right up against our world right now. And it is now now is the time to think about who is running or not running our city and our state, and to be more involved. Donate, sign petitions, read about stuff, make your own opinions, or make your own mind up. But gosh darn it, we all need to do a better job of being involved, as opposed to just saying that we're cranky and upset about our local or state politicians.
Craig Swanson, everyone of Redside Partners. We want to thank Craig again. We really appreciate him giving us his time. Next, we had a conversation with Darren Reynolds of Pilot Property Management, a Seattle-based company on Queen Anne Hill.
Regarding the effect of the COVID-19 environment on multifamily, how has it affected vacancy rates and occupancy rates?
Oh, yeah. So I would say that the rental market kind of missed out on its normal like spring and summer bump that it normally sees. And we've seen the same number of move outs that we normally would see. And so that is not helping things. I would say that the slower leasing traffic causes slightly longer vacancy times.
Mm-hmm.
And then, getting resources to do make readies on apartments has been impacted as well. So, like normally you can get a fridge in like 2 days, it's delivered and get it installed. Right now, you may see 2 to 3 weeks to get a fridge delivered. So that's definitely slowing things down. So you try to plan ahead as much as you can, but, a lot of tenants are not comfortable with us doing pre-move out inspections. They just don't want other people in their apartment because they're afraid of infection and, they're just not comfortable with it.
So how do you handle that?
It means that sometimes we'll ask them, be like, hey, can you just take a couple pictures of things for us? And we'll want to see like the, general condition. But a lot of times we end up waiting until the day we get keys to be able to go into an apartment and really assess it to know what we've got to do. We know that there's going to be general things that are always done, and so we can plan those things ahead. But if there's any surprises to us that weren't seen on the latest inspection, that definitely adds some time.
I hadn't thought about the fact that it's hard to get the appliances. Nobody has mentioned that, but that's an issue, isn't it?
Yeah, it is. There's some supply chain things that are affected. Not everything, and the labor piece is a little bit slower. I mean, we have the same number of people that we're working with, but the general demand is a little bit higher. People are in their apartments, seeing things more. The work order that they may have been sitting on for a month, they've decided, I'm working from home. I see this all the time. I'm just going to put it in. Maybe they just have more time to think about that stuff or access to their computer while they're thinking about it. So the general demand for repairs is a little higher. So it creates a draw on the resources that also plays into that.
Are we seeing higher vacancy rates because of COVID, because of the political environment, because of these two things?
Not necessarily. So an overall rate, our percentages are holding fairly well steady. The leasing staff is kind of working themselves to the bone because the leasing traffic, like the general market, has softened, but they do a good job getting them filled. So our overall percentage for occupied versus vacant apartments is actually maintained fairly well. Maybe a little bit of a slip.
What is that percentage?
So 94.5% as of like the 5th of September. I think as of today, it's at 95.5%.
Let's talk about collections. What's the percentage of tenants who are paying? I'm not talking about occupancy, but the tenants in place. What percentage of those are paying their rent?
Oh, yeah. I pay attention to that stat all the time. I look at it daily. So for the multifamily side, so for residential, it's around 93%. Pretty consistently. I'd say it's slipped a tiny bit over the last 2 months, down into like the 91.5%, 92%. But yeah, 93% of occupied apartments are regularly paying their rent. And getting it paid by the end of the month by the time the next month hits.
Interesting. Is this changing? Does this vary from area to area?
I see less of a pattern from area to area. The pattern's more among asset class. So higher priced rents, we're seeing less impact on those properties. And I would guess that has to do with who employers are, where our lower rent points are definitely more impacted.
Are you seeing move outs into the outlying areas?
When we do get information on where people are moving, yeah, from the core out a little bit. I mean, it's not the exodus that I think a lot of people are seeing, and maybe that just hasn't happened yet. But we do see people kind of moving out a little bit more, and so the properties that are mid-range price in not in the core, the leasing for those properties is actually doing fairly okay.
The political environment. Michael has a bunch of questions about that.
Yeah, okay. Real quick, just to extend on that last bit, are you neighbor to neighborhood is one thing, but are you seeing differences in type of units? Are studios or 2 bedrooms any different in terms of desirability or rentability at this point?
I'm not seeing a pattern quite yet on that. I think that and it's going to be hard to separate from the overarching seasonal pattern here soon, because it is September, where 2 bedrooms and 3 bedrooms become increasingly more difficult this time of year, where during the springtime, they definitely have more of a seasonality to them than studios and 1 bedrooms do. So hard to say right now. If I were to look at our data from, say, 3 months ago, I might be able to answer that more accurately.
Okay. Well, I guess on the regulatory front, though, what have you guys found? Since the latest package of bills at the city council level, and just some of the general trends going on, to be some of the more difficult things to comply with, and what steps have you taken internally to make sure that you got all your I's dotted and T's crossed?
Oh man, you mean more like the legislation they passed mid-year last year, or like the moratorium related stuff?
Well, both. I mean, the moratorium, it creates its own set of issues, but as far as those 3 primary bills related to number of people in a unit, or what you can charge for and what you can't.
Yeah, the package that passed, it was like October-ish, or maybe it was a little sooner than that, but it took effect the first week of November, and then some of it was for January 1st. I haven't run into any issues with it yet. I mean, it was scary when it was passed, but I think we've just been lucky to not have some of those more case-specific examples. Having somebody who wants to move in, and then you already have somebody living in an apartment, and then you tell them they've got to be screened and added to the lease. I haven't run into that much. And then the domestic violence portion of it, really haven't had any experience or any need to use that law. And the other stuff is pretty easy to follow, because it kind of sets a baseline, or it's not something that we weren't already doing.
Sure.
Including rental rights and things like that, but adding the RRIO certificate with an eviction notice, that kind of stuff is just an extra step. It's just more labor, more I's to dot and T's to cross, which it's a pain, but it's not like it's a huge burden for us.
We should mention, in case, I'm sure everybody does know what RRIO is, but it's the city's inspection program.
Yeah, it is. So if you've got a property, it's got to be registered with the city, and then they can randomly inspect you every 10 years. They give you a notice for it ahead of time. But you've got to be registered so that they can draw your name out of the hat and do your inspection.
Have rents gone down?
Oh, yeah. Well, that's the wrong response. I would say that rents are definitely softening.
How much?
We're seeing mostly flattening, but not going backwards. So most of the stuff that's vacating now, we're not seeing the rent increases unless somebody's really below market that we were seeing, even a year ago. So the number of concessions in the market right now are up. We're seeing flat prices with more concessions. So your net rent after the lease term is definitely going backwards. And that's hard to adjust to, because it's constantly moving. and you don't want to get caught. You don't want to be the last one to adjust and be sitting on all that vacancy.
Interesting.
We've heard from some management companies that the tenants are a little more emboldened now to maybe take on, well, you sort of alluded to a little bit where they're filling out work orders and maybe addressing issues that they might not have had in the past. But some of the other stories are they're willfully withholding rent despite having the capability to pay and things along those lines. Has that have those issues popped up within your operation?
Yeah, a little bit. When we don't get payment from somebody, we don't always know why. We always reach out, but we may not get communication back from them. We're trying to set up payment plans, or we just want to know what's going on so that we can, know when to check in, so we're not bugging somebody too much if they're going through a hard time. But, maybe we can help by pointing them to the right resource. We have had a couple of people that misunderstand the new laws, and they have said that they're withholding rent because of their belief that they don't have to pay it. Or, there's people that are still working. They never lost their job, and they are not paying their rent. And not all of them communicate with us about why. So some of them have said that they're actively withholding, and but I think that's a very small minority. Most of the people that are withholding rent are just not communicating with us, and so we can't say definitively if that's why.
So if it is a small percentage, though, that, and you may not know the reason why, but it is a small percentage of those who are working and are refusing to pay. What could you put a number on? 1%, 2%, 3%?
Oh, less than 1%. Yeah,
that's good to hear.
It's not very many. Honestly, I'm really impressed and proud of some of the tenants that are impacted, and they are just scrapping. They're doing everything they can to try to stay current. They make small payments throughout the month, and they're really sticking it out. But it is kind of aggravating when you've got people who are working and they misunderstand the law from whatever piece of misinformation they've been given, and they feel that they're not required to pay rent. And I don't know what they think is going to happen at the end of the line, but that day is going to happen eventually, and there's going to be a tough conversation.
Have you guys been at all impacted by the single family market and just, how much movement there's been in home sales in Seattle? Has that been a contributing factor to some of the difficulties in renting units and basically just the people that otherwise would have been tenants of an apartment building are now taking the step forward or leap forward to, purchase in the area?
From the demand side, for leasing, we don't know because those people don't show up. And, a lot of the slow leasing is attributed mostly to pandemic related causes. At least that's what's easy for us to point the finger at. But for existing tenants who are either month to month or at the end of their lease, we are seeing a larger number purchase homes and move out of the rental market. So I was just reviewing our cause of move outs recently because I wanted to see, how many are COVID related, how many are from, what other reason. And I was surprised to see how many there were from purchasing homes. I don't have the exact number in front of me, but it was more than I was expecting to see.
Interesting.
I know you're not clairvoyant, but look into the future for me if you could. Look into your crystal ball and tell me, is this going to go away? And when it does go away, COVID-19, the pandemic, and when it does go away, is this a pivotal point in history where as we move forward, it's going to completely change the way we do business? Are more people going to work at home because now companies realize it can be done? It will ease traffic. Will people continue to wear masks? Even before the pandemic, we'd see pictures of foreign countries where people were wearing masks for whatever reason, pollution or fear of the pandemic, whatever.
That's an interesting thought. Of course, the crystal ball is very foggy. I always tell people that when they ask me what the rent increase is going to be. But I do think that there's going to be some changes. Just from my personal opinion, nothing that's based entirely in data or facts. even just with our own team and with friends I've talked to that, they've not here at Pilot, but friends I've talked to have had bosses that were resistant to allowing people to work from home, for fear of low productivity. The enemies of working from home, as I heard from somewhere, was, the fridge, the bed, and the couch. But the reality is, I think a lot of employers are finding out that employees are very productive from home. And it's kind of removing that fear that employers had. And so I think that is going to have a lasting impact it's going to have a ripple effect through a lot of things, including commercial office space. I think that the multifamily industry is going to see an impact from that. I don't know how great that impact is going to be. That's where
an impact on the positive
speculation
side?
ends. Well, I think it depends on where you own property. I think that if you own a property that its main amenity is going to be its proximity to a certain employer's office, and its walkability, versus the amenities that are more amenable to somebody who doesn't need to be in that exact location, you've got market replacements for a lot of those amenities. The one that's not replaceable is living within a couple blocks of your office. And so if that is no longer a requirement, market replacements become easier to find.
Darren Reynolds of Pilot Property Management. Thank you, Darren. Thank you very much. We really do appreciate you taking the time to talk with us. Next, we talked with Bruce Kahn, who heads up the property management arm of the Foundation Group. The COVID environment, its effect on multifamily, has it impacted vacancy rates?
Yes, it absolutely has. What we're seeing for the first time is apartments going on the market, and we're not getting calls and people are not answering the ads. We've lowered prices, we've offered more incentives, and that doesn't seem to be changing anything. So it's definitely, I think, a result of that.
What do you get a sense of what the vacancy rate is? It's hard to really put your finger on it, especially since Mike and Patty retired. What about the inner city, Capitol Hill, Queen Anne, Green Lake? What's the occupancy rate or the vacancy rate there, roughly?
Well, that's probably the interesting thing that we're finding, because we do have a lot of buildings under management, is that the better buildings that we have, where the income level is higher, are running at about 97% occupancy and 97% in terms of people paying their rent. The problem buildings that we have is with the lower priced units. Even it's ridiculous today to say lower price, because even those are like $1,500, $1,600, $1,700 plus utilities and parking. Those buildings is where we're really having problems with vacancies, and the vacancy hasn't changed that much because of the moratorium. So even people that can't pay and have not been able to pay since March are still in the units. They're not moving out, and they don't have to pay rent.
So even with those, say, Class B, Class C buildings, I guess we could call them, the vacancy rate still, the occupancy rate still is like 97% for those, or is it a little bit lower than that?
I would say in those buildings, I'd say probably about 95%. And I think, the difference is the economic vacancy that we're facing as opposed to the physical vacancy.
That was going to be my next question. Of those tenants that are in place, what's the collection? It used to be, I was hearing it was 90%. Has that changed?
No, and again, our buildings have always operated well, but we pay a lot of attention to the tenants, and we're really on top of our game. So we have, as I think I alluded to earlier, the collections on the better buildings, on the B. We don't do A buildings or the new institutional properties, but we have some big buildings that are, I would call them B plus or maybe A minus with amenities. Those buildings are operating at about a 97% collection. Those people are still employed. Most of them are working for Amazon. They're in the IT business and they're fully employed. The ones that will be the C buildings, those are the ones that we're seeing about 80% or 20% economic vacancy or 75%. or 25% economic vacancy, because those are the buildings where the people have been hardest hit. They're in the food service industry and other hourly employees that have lost their jobs or have suffered a lot of cutbacks.
This is sort of dovetails into some of Michael's questions. He wanted to ask about the political environment and how that's, Michael?
Well, yeah, first, I was curious how, the neighborhood breakdown in some of the buildings that you managed with the University of Washington being sort of not in full motion at this point. Has the U District taken more of a hit? Has what happened on Capitol Hill, is there still lingering effects as a result of that? What are you guys seeing?
There is no question in my mind that because of the way the city council and the mayor have acted towards owners and the way that they've handled the problems that have occurred on Capitol Hill, those neighborhoods are no longer the star places where people want to live anymore. We're seeing a lot of flight from in-city properties to out-of-the-city properties. People are afraid. There's still a great deal of crime in those areas that didn't used to exist so rampantly, and so we're I don't think it's ever going to be back to where it was before all this started. Where it's going to end up and how it will balance out is anybody's guess, but it's not positive, I will tell you that. And so many of the people that are moving out not because they've lost their job. They don't want to live in the downtown corridor anymore. If you drop down into Belltown and those areas, people can't get in and out of their buildings on street level because of the homeless problem that's there. And that's just it's a very bad situation.
Where are they moving to?
Most of them are moving now up to Linwood. They're moving to the east side. They're moving to Bothell. Some of them are moving down south, all different directions. And, when the Sound Transit comes online, that's really going to be a game changer because you don't have to live in the city anymore. You can, jump on a train and be in the city in 10 or 15 minutes. That's changing. I think people working from home is going to have a tremendous effect on rentals because, first of all, there's been a real push on because of the rent prices to have these mini units, the 350 square foot units. Well, people are working from home now. Those aren't going to be the things that people want to have. They want more space. And they don't have to be as close into the office buildings as they used to have to be. So we're going to see again. There's so many moving parts to what's happening, and it just requires constant watching and trying to figure out what the next move is going to be when that happens. Because I don't think anybody really knows what's happening at this point.
Do you see that happening more on Capitol Hill, say, than Queen Anne? That movement out?
Yeah, absolutely. Yes. Yeah. Capitol Hill is still. It's depressing. I mean, you drive through Capitol Hill. It used to be such a vibrant place. And a lot of it's the effect of COVID. It was active with people and restaurants and coffee shops. And I was touring an investor through there last evening. It was about 3:30, 4 o'clock. Streets were dead. Most of the restaurants were closed. Very, very few people on the street. And I think that it's not a good situation.
Are there certain types, aside from the amenity standpoint and maybe interior finishes, are there certain types of units that are renting quicker right now? Are one bedrooms more desirable? The reason I ask is you're hearing as a result of COVID and people staying home that people's relationships are falling apart because they're with each other 24 hours a day and a lot of breakups. Are you seeing that studios and one bedrooms are renting quicker than say a larger 2-bedroom unit?
No, I think the larger units, in our experience, the larger units are renting better because people want more space. If you drive by the buildings that have a lot of studios, there's one on the foot of Queen Anne that's got a lot of small 1-bedrooms, and they're running about, I think they have 30 vacancies out of 100 units. Wow. It's the studios and the mini apartments are absolutely more troublesome than the larger units in other buildings because people don't want to be that close to each other anymore. But I haven't heard. I think a lot of that's press that people are fighting and getting divorced. 9 months from now, you'll probably hear there's a big baby boom.
Right.
We're stuck into it.
Right.
So, I haven't experienced that. We have not experienced that.
Okay.
And as I say, we are really on top of our guests and our residents and our buildings. And so we're in constant communication with them. And we're small enough to be able to have that personal connection. And we're not hearing any of that.
Got it. What outside of COVID, with some of the new regulations and certainly the general direction that the city council has taken, in the last few years, what have been some of the challenges getting everybody at Foundation Group up to date on what's going on to make sure that you're in regulatory compliance and not don't have the city breathing down your neck?
Well, we are extremely cautious, as everybody has to be. I've got a real estate attorney that, we used to use them once in a while. Now we're, whenever something comes out that isn't exactly 100% clear, we'll have to get their feedback. But you've got to be vigilant. We had one of our on-site managers send out a rental increase. It was an accidental situation. And within 3 days, we received a phone call from the Attorney General. And I have to tell you, we thought it was a joke. They left the message saying it was the Attorney General. We thought someone was playing a prank on us, but we looked up the phone number and everything, and it was for real. And they were very nice about it. We explained that it was an accident. So I think that today, and I think it's more difficult on the individual property owners because, it's our job to stay on top of this stuff and be involved with it. And if you're a single property owner or, maybe you have 2 or 3 buildings and you're not managing full time, it's very, very easy to get yourself into trouble today. In general, renters have become extremely litigious, and they know their rights. They have free legal representation, and so you've got to just be careful today of how you do things and make sure that you're in compliance.
On that front, do you get the sense that there are tenants out there that are maybe listening to, you mentioned sort of emboldened, but are listening to some of these maybe fringe voices that are encouraging people not to pay their rent even if they have the ability to do so?
I've heard that. I haven't experienced that. I mean, maybe some of the people that are in place are in that direction, but no one's going to come out and tell you that's why they're doing it. What I'm really afraid of is not afraid, but I don't know how to handle it, is when this rent moratorium burns off on currently December 31st. They've extended it twice. They may extend it again at the expense of solely putting it on the landlords, which is absolutely ridiculous. But when that burns off, these people are going to owe a lot of money to the landlords, maybe $16,000, $15,000, and I have no idea how they're going to be able to make that up, even though we have to give them a 1-year payment program. A lot of the people were just hanging on, barely making their rent to begin with, and now if you add that on top of it, God only knows.
But they still seem to be, most of them, even in the face of government encouraging them not to pay, most of them seem to be paying.
Most of them are, why? Because I've always said that people want to, the last thing people will give up is the roof over their head. And I think most intelligent renters know that if you don't pay your rent and you get evicted, it's going to be very difficult to get another unit. Landlords are just going to look at that wrong.
What percentage of your tenancy, say, is working on a payment plan? Maybe they can't pay all of the rent, maybe just a portion. They haven't. Our commercial tenants have started payment plans, but our multifamily people that aren't paying or will not pay, I am sure, until the moratorium burns off in December. But there are how many of those are not paying then?
Well, again, it goes back to the beginning of the conversation. In the C buildings, probably 20-25%. Some of the buildings are not paying rent. Mm-hmm. And in our better buildings, only 3% aren't paying rent.
Got it. Has some of these shifting jobs to the east side and various other places, or have you seen any? And that wouldn't have been directly maybe COVID related or even recent, but have certain communities or certain buildings that where you manage property taken a hit as a result of, say, Facebook or Amazon shifting jobs elsewhere, or is there enough of a job pool out there that really doesn't impact rental rates or vacancy rates?
I don't think it will. I think the city is in for an adjustment. We have lived very, very high on the hog, if you will, for the last 7, 8, 10 years. As quickly as we would get a vacancy, it would fill within a day or two, and it stayed that way. The other thing that we're really going to be facing that I think people have not thought about is that we're very careful when we lease units to make sure that they do not become vacant in the winter months, because between October to February, it is very difficult to rent a unit in the city of Seattle. So we always make sure that our rents, if they come up for renewal, are coming up in April, May, June, July, August. So if we have to turn them over, we'll get a tenant right in there. With all of these people now not paying, and if they do vacate in December, it's going to be just a bear to get those units rented.
Look in your crystal ball. How much of what's going back to COVID? How much of what's going on is going to continue? Do you think? I mean, once COVID is over, are we still going to be wearing masks? Are people still going to be working from home now that companies realize it can be done?
Yeah, I really do believe that at least maybe 20% of companies have realized that they do not need to have employees on site, that it's very effective to have them working from home. So I think moving forward, we're going to see companies downsize on the amount of square footage that they're leasing. They'll have shared offices where people will come in, on Monday, Wednesday, Fridays, and the other ones will come in on Tuesdays and Thursdays and switch that around. So we're in for an adjustment. In terms of the mask and cleanliness and everything else, first of all, I don't believe COVID's going away until, fourth quarter of next year, hopefully. So we're going to be with it for a while, and I think the results of it will stay around for a long time. But eventually, people being people, and we'll go back to quote unquote normal. But it's going to be a new normal. It's never going to be the same as it was pre-COVID.
No handshakes anymore, fist bumps.
I think that'll come back. I'm a hugger, so I hope it comes back.
Bruce Kahn, everyone, of the Foundation Group. Thank you, Bruce, for giving us a picture of what you're seeing in the market. Hopefully, you've had the time to listen to at least a portion of all 4 interviews. Rob Kellum of Serco Residential Properties, Craig Swanson of Redside Partners, Darren Reynolds of Pilot Property Management, and Bruce Kahn of the Foundation Group, because all 4, taken together from large to small, seems to give us the best picture of what's happening in Seattle and in the country. Insights, the name of the program. I'm Bob Wright, 206-619-3274, 206-619-3274.
And I'm Mike Walsh, 310-383-1570. That's 310-383-1570.
And give us a call if you'd like us to do an analysis on your building. We're available 24/7 for you. Insights, the name of the program.